Have you ever given something simple to a stranger, only to find your whole life changed by it? What if that stranger was wounded, bleeding, hunted? And what if helping him meant risking everything you ever owned? Even your life, Elijah McCade was just a quiet rancher in the deserts of New Mexico, until one morning, a blood trail led him to the edge of a decision no man ever wants to make: a dying Hopi warrior, a rifle in his hand, and a choice. Would you pull the trigger or offer water? And face what comes next? This is a story about mercy, about truth, about what it means to be a man when no one is watching. If this speaks to something inside you, stay with us. And please like and subscribe to help Wild West Echoes reach 1,000 subs. The desert remembers, and so will you. The desert air was still, but Elijah McCade knew better. When you lived out here long enough, you learned to listen, not just with your ears, but with your bones. That evening, the sky stretched wide and orange over the low ridges of eastern New Mexico. The wind moved slow, sweeping dust across the porch, tugging softly at the dry leaves of a lone cottonwood. Then Elijah saw it, a trail, thin, dark, and broken, leading across the dirt by his horse trough. He stepped closer. It was blood, not from a calf or coyote. He knew that kind. This was different, thicker, human. He crouched, ran a finger along one of the drops. Still wet, still warm. The trail led toward the old stone cistern just beyond the barn. He followed slowly, boots crunching over grit. Every step brought a memory. The time he found a rustler hiding in his hay, the boy who broke in once just to steal water. He reached the corner and stopped. There, slumped against the wall, a young man, skin deep brown under streaks of dust. His shirt was torn open. Blood soaked his side. One hand pressed the wound. The other reached toward the bucket hanging above the cistern. Elijah froze. The man was barely breathing, but his eyes were wide open, watching, alert, not pleading, not wild, just waiting. Elijah rested a hand on the revolver at his hip. This was not the first time he had found trouble near his water. He stepped closer. Slowly. The man's lips moved. No sound came out at first. Then a whisper. Water. Elijah studied his face. He saw something in those eyes. Something he remembered once before. Years ago, when the rain stopped and the land cracked open, he had gone 3 days with nothing. He had looked up at the same sky and begged. Now, that same need stared back at him. He let go of the gun. Elijah pulled the rope, lowered the bucket, held it to the man's mouth. The stranger drank deep. Then again, then again. When he was done, he let out a shaky breath and leaned back, sweat beading on his brow. His name was still unknown, his story still hidden. But something passed between them in that moment, and Elijah felt it settle in his chest. This man was not just lost. He was being hunted. The last light of the sun stretched low over the ridge. Elijah stood, following the blood trail with his eyes. Clear, direct, right across the open yard. Anyone could track that. He looked down at the young man again. His shirt now clung to him with blood and sweat. Whoever shot him had not done it from a distance. That wound was close, intimate. It meant someone had looked him in the eyes and pulled the trigger, and whoever it was might be nearby, might be watching right now. Elijah moved fast. He grabbed a bucket and splashed water over the trail, washing away the worst of it. Not perfect, but maybe enough to confuse a tracker. He returned to the barn, found an old rag, a flask of whiskey, and a length of clean gauze from the war chest he never thought he would open again. He crouched beside the man. This is going to sting. The man nodded, barely. Elijah poured whiskey into the wound. The man hissed, clenched his teeth, but said nothing. That silence said more than a scream would. Elijah wrapped the wound tight, looked around. The desert was quiet again, but too quiet. Then came the sound, hoofbeats, low at first, then louder, coming from the south. Elijah walked to the edge of the porch, looked across the dirt. There, dust rising, horses moving fast, maybe 4, maybe more behind them. He looked back at the man, still sitting, still bleeding. No way to move him far. He could hide him in the root cellar. But there was no time. Elijah stood still for a moment, thought of his land, his quiet life, thought of the nights he spent alone, listening to the coyotes and the wind. And now this, a bleeding stranger on his dirt. Riders coming hard, a choice, simple but sharp. Leave him, say nothing, or stand here and face whatever came next. He looked at the man one last time, and the man looked back. He gave a slight nod, like he knew, like he had always known. Elijah nodded in return, then stepped forward, toward the sound, toward the truth. Elijah McCade did not speak much. Some men filled silence with noise. Elijah listened to it. The ranch was not much, just a small house, a broken fence line, one stubborn mule, but it was his. And for the past 6 years, it had been enough. He used to count the days. Now he just marked the seasons. Spring meant cold mornings and fence repairs. Summer brought dust and rattlesnakes. Autumn made the nights quiet again. And winter still hurt. He never talked about the fire, or the smoke, or the faces he had loved and lost. He buried that part deep, like the bones of cattle that did not survive the drought. People in town called him strange, distant. Maybe he was. But he had earned that distance. Elijah stood at the window, looking out over the open plain. The hoofbeats were gone now, faded into the horizon. For now. Inside the barn, the young man still rested. His breathing was steady but shallow. Elijah had not asked questions. Not yet. He had learned that sometimes silence told a better story. He brought out a clean blanket and a tin cup of water, set both beside the man, then sat down outside on the porch. The wind picked up. He closed his eyes and remembered it had been 12 years since the war. He had fought under a name he no longer spoke, carried a rifle through Tennessee, Georgia, and Texas. He had seen men cry for mothers they had not spoken to in years, seen them die with prayers caught in their throats. When it ended, he walked west, looking for something that did not feel like blood. He found it in New Mexico, or thought he had, until the fever came, until the fire took the roof, and the woman he loved, and the boy with hair the color of her smile. After that, Elijah built fences, dug a new well. He spoke to the wind, and not much else. Now here he was, face to face with another lost soul bleeding into his dirt, and the ache in his chest felt familiar. Elijah leaned forward, rubbed the back of his neck. He had not touched a gun in over a year. Not since the coyotes got into the henhouse, but now the weight of the revolver on his belt felt too real. He reached for his pipe, packed it, lit it with a flint he kept in a small pouch. The first puff burned, the second calmed his hands. Smoke curled up and vanished into the sky. The young man stirred. Elijah turned, watched him. He was not more than 20, maybe 25, strong shoulders, old scars on his forearms. Not a stranger to pain. His face looked peaceful now, but Elijah had seen men wear peace like a mask. He stood, stepped into the barn again. The man's eyes opened, still sharp, still tracking every movement. Elijah did not speak. He nodded once. Set down a small loaf of dry bread. You got a name, he asked. Finally. The man said nothing, just blinked slowly. Not yet. Huh, Elijah said. No answer, only breath, and pain, and silence. Elijah sat on an old crate, crossed his arms. I do not care what you did, he said softly. Only what you need. The man watched him. For a long while, then his voice came. Horse. Toma. Elijah nodded. Well, Toma, you picked the wrong stretch of land to bleed on, that earned the faintest curve of a smile. Then the man coughed and closed his eyes again. Elijah stepped outside. The stars were beginning to show. The desert grew colder fast at night. He pulled his coat tighter, listened again. No hoofbeats now. But the silence was heavy, like something waiting just out of sight. He looked up at the moon, thought of his son, and wondered if mercy ever came without cost. The morning came slow, not with songbirds, not with warmth, but with cold silence, and the kind of pale light that made everything feel uncertain. Elijah mccade had not slept much. He had taken the rocking chair outside and sat most of the night with his coat wrapped tight and his rifle across his knees. The stars above had watched with him, so had the coyotes, but nothing came. No riders, no shots, no answers, just the wind, and that trail of blood, still damp where the water had not reached. He checked on Toma before the sun fully crested the ridge. The young man was awake, breathing slow, but clearer now. Elijah brought him more water, a few sips at a time. You will make it, he said, if you stay still. Toma said nothing, but he nodded. The bandage had held through the night. The bleeding slowed, but the look in his eyes had not changed. Still alert, still wary, still ready to run. If he could, Elijah could see it. That kind of fear came from more than pain. Later, Elijah stepped out to check the fence line, mostly habit, partly excuse. He needed to think. The sky was wide and blue, with clouds low in the east. The land stretched flat and dry around him. No sound but the wind through brittle grass. And something else. He stopped, bent down near the gate, pressed a hand to the ground. Hoofprints, faint, not fresh, maybe hours old, but too many to be a lone rider, and too deep for a passing patrol. Someone had circled the ranch last night, and not just passed through, watched. Elijah stood slowly, wiped his hands on his coat. The back of his neck itched. Back inside the barn, he found Toma trying to sit up. He moved slow, but stubborn. Elijah stepped in and steadied him. You are not ready for walking, he said. I do not plan to walk, Toma whispered. His voice was rough, but his eyes were clearer, focused. I need my pouch. Elijah raised an eyebrow. What pouch? Toma nodded weakly toward the bedroll he had arrived with. Elijah had left it near the wall. He fetched it, set it in Toma's lap. The young man opened the leather flap with shaking hands, pulled out a folded paper, stained with blood, held it out, for you to read. Elijah hesitated, then took it. The paper was creased and smudged, the ink blurred in places, but he could still read the words. A letter. Signed at the bottom by Judge Silas Trent, a man Elijah had heard of, powerful, connected, not someone who handed out letters lightly. The writing spoke of an agreement, a meeting, and a warning. Men within the Land Commission have been trading arms under the guise of peace. The boy carries names, evidence. If anything happens to me. Elijah lowered the page. looked at Toma. Where did you get this? Toma looked back at him. I was there. I saw him write it. And now he is dead. Toma nodded. Elijah felt a knot tighten in his gut. He stepped outside, looked east, then west. Nothing moved, but now the silence felt heavier, weighted with something he could not name. He rolled the paper and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. Then he walked to the shed, pulled out a long-handled shovel, not for burying, not yet. He dug near the cistern, just a few inches, just enough to hide tracks, then scattered sand and gravel over the blood trail again. He worked quiet, steady, and when he was done, he stood still, felt the wind shift. When he came back to the barn, Toma had fallen asleep again. Elijah sat beside him, did not speak for a while. Then he said, "Why are they after you?" Eyes opened again. Toma looked up at the beams in the ceiling. They do not want truth. They want quiet. Elijah nodded. I know the type. Toma coughed, winced. Truth has names, and the names have power. His voice faded into silence. Elijah watched him breathe, watched the wind stir the edges of the blanket, and felt something old awaken in him. Something he had buried with the flag he once carried. Duty, not the kind you wear, but the kind you carry when no one else will. The sound came just after noon, low at first, then growing, a steady rhythm, hooves, hard and fast across dry ground. Elijah McCade stood by the barn, wiping sweat from his brow with a worn cloth. He had heard plenty of horses in his life. These were not wild mustangs or passing ranchers. This was formation. Trained men, moving with purpose. He looked toward the south trail. Dust kicked up in a long, rising line. At least 6 riders, maybe more, beyond the ridge. Elijah stepped back into the barn. Toma sat propped against the wall, blanket around his shoulders. His eyes opened before Elijah spoke. They are coming. Toma's jaw tightened. How many enough to matter? Toma reached for his pouch. His hand shook. He stopped. Elijah crouched beside him. You stay here, no matter what. Toma grabbed his arm. You do not understand. If they find me, I do understand. Elijah cut in. That is why you stay put. Toma let go, slowly, his breath shallow, but steady. Elijah stepped out again, waited. The riders came fast into view, 6 of them. The leader rode tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, thick mustache, blue coat faded from sun and wear, silver star on the chest, Captain Boone Halley. Elijah had heard the name years ago. A soldier once, now something else. People said he worked for the land syndicates, cleared out trouble like Toma. Boone reined in just 10 feet away. The others spread out behind him, eyes scanning the land, guns on hips, rifles strapped, not a friendly visit. Afternoon, Boone said. His voice was smooth, calm, too calm. Elijah McCade. Right. Elijah nodded once. Mind if we talk? Boone asked. You are already here. Boone smiled. We are tracking a man. Dangerous. Might be wounded. Might be hiding nearby. Elijah kept his face still. Nothing out here but fence posts and dry air. Boone looked past him. Toward the barn. Toward the well. Funny thing, trail ends right near your cistern. Elijah did not look back. Just said, dust plays tricks out here. Boone dismounted. Boots hit the ground heavy. He walked slowly toward Elijah, eyes hard. I do not like being lied to, Boone said. I do not like being threatened, Elijah replied. The 2 men stood just feet apart, heat rising between them. Boone glanced down, at the dirt, spots darker than sand, Blood, maybe, or water, or both. Mind if I take a look inside the barn? He asked. I do mind. Boone raised an eyebrow. You refusing to cooperate? I am standing on my own land. Boone's smile faded. You always this stubborn, only when someone comes looking for what does not belong to them. Behind Boone, one of the riders shifted in his saddle, nervous, young, maybe new to this game. Boone turned slightly. Search the perimeter. Look for signs. Do not miss anything. The men rode off in different directions. Elijah watched them go, then looked back at Boone. You looking for something real, or something to justify whatever comes next? Boone's jaw tensed. I follow orders. From who Boone said nothing. Elijah did not press, did not need to. The silence said enough. Inside the barn, Toma stayed still. He had not moved since Elijah left. He could hear the voices outside, could feel the weight of each footstep on the dirt. His fingers clutched the edge of the blanket. The pain in his side pulsed with every breath. But he stayed quiet, still, invisible. He knew the sound of men like Boone. He had heard them before, just before the shooting started. Outside, Boone walked slowly around the barn, not rushing, just looking. Elijah followed close, like a shadow. When Boone reached the water trough, he paused, bent down, touched the ground, then stood. You sure you have not seen anyone? Elijah met his eyes. I am sure. Boone stared for a long time, then nodded. All right. He turned, walked back to his horse. But something in the way he moved said it was not over. Not yet. As the riders regrouped, Boone mounted up. We will be around, he said. Keep your eyes open. Elijah nodded, watched them ride off, dust rising again, fading into the ridge. He stood still, waited until the sound of hooves was gone, then turned and walked back to the barn. Toma opened his eyes when Elijah entered. They are gone, Elijah said, for now. Toma exhaled slowly, then whispered, He is not just a soldier. Boone, he was at the meeting. The night the judge died, Elijah stopped in place. The judge Toma nodded. I saw him. I remember his voice. Elijah sat down slowly. The letter in his pocket felt heavier now. Everything had just changed, and the worst was yet to come. Elijah McCade stood in the doorway of the barn. His hands rested at his sides. But inside, he felt a storm building, the kind that started slow, silent, then grew teeth. He watched Toma. The young man was weaker now. His eyes blinked more slowly. Pain carved shadows across his face. But he stayed upright, held steady. There was something in that boy. Something Elijah could not name. Strength, maybe. Or resolve. Maybe both. You saw Boone at the judge's meeting, Elijah asked. Toma nodded. He was not in uniform, but he gave orders, told men where to stand, when to fire. Elijah exhaled through his nose. This was not some drunken raid. Toma shook his head. They knew what they were doing. The judge was not supposed to leave that room alive. Elijah leaned against a beam, his throat dry. Then he is not just chasing you. He is finishing a job. Toma looked down, eliminating the last witness. Outside, the wind picked up, not strong, just enough to rattle the roof tin and whistle through the gaps. Elijah stepped out into the yard. The sun was lower now, late afternoon light turning everything gold and red. He walked slow across the dust. His boots left clean tracks, visible, just like Toma's blood trail had been. He reached the fence, stood there for a while, looking out. He knew what was coming. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Boone had not ridden off in defeat. He was circling, waiting, watching. Elijah looked back at the barn. His hand drifted to the revolver on his hip, then dropped. He walked to the shed, opened the door slow. Inside, against the back wall, under a canvas tarp, was a trap door. The old root cellar, dug by his grandfather, reinforced years ago when raids were common. Cool, dry, deep. He lifted the lid. The air below smelled of stone and earth. He fetched a lantern, lit it, stepped down the ladder. It still held steady. Shelves lined the walls, old jars, dusty crates, plenty of space. He stood in the center, closed his eyes, felt the silence wrap around him. When he came back to the barn, Toma looked up. "What is it?" "A place," Elijah said. "To keep you hidden?" Toma tried to move. Failed. Elijah stepped in, lifted him gently. Toma winced but did not cry out. He was lighter than he looked. Elijah carried him across the yard, not fast, but steady. The wind brushed over them. A hawk cried overhead. No one watched. Not yet. They reached the shed. Elijah stepped down into the cellar, slow and sure, set Toma on an old cot, laid the blanket over him. The young man's breath was shallow, but steady. Elijah handed him a canteen. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." Toma looked up. "Why are you doing this?" Elijah paused, then sat on the bottom step, and answered with no hesitation. "Because someone should have done the same. For my boy." The words hung in the air, heavy, sharp. Then Elijah stood, climbed out, closed the hatch, and covered it again with the canvas tarp. Back in the house, Elijah washed his hands at the basin. The water turned pink, then clear. He stared at his reflection in the tin mirror. Lines deeper than he remembered, eyes tired, but clearer. He loaded his rifle, checked the windows, lit only one lamp. Then he sat down and waited. That night, the desert held its breath. No coyotes, no wind, just silence, and the weight of what was hidden beneath it. It was still dark when Elijah McCade lit the lantern again. He waited until the stars began to fade behind the ridges, until the cold had settled into the bones of the earth. Then he opened the shed, lifted the trapdoor, and stepped down. The root cellar held its silence like a prayer. Toma lay still on the cot. His breathing was slow, but stronger than yesterday. Eyes closed, but he was not asleep. "I heard them," he said quietly. Elijah sat on the bottom step. "Who riders?" Toma said. "Last night, 2 of them. They circled, then left." Elijah nodded. "Boone is watching." Toma opened his eyes. The lantern light made them gleam like flint. "I need to tell you the rest." Elijah leaned forward. "Then tell it." Toma shifted slightly, winced, but spoke. "There was a meeting in Santa Fe 2 weeks ago. The judge, my mother, some men from the military. They were finalizing the second treaty." Elijah raised an eyebrow. The second, Toma nodded. "One to include the southern lands, expand the protections, stop the raids, bring our people back into the talks." And someone wanted that stopped. Toma's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes, someone powerful." He paused, took a sip from the canteen Elijah had left, then went on. "My mother Naoma, she trusted Judge Trent. He wanted peace, real peace, not just on paper." Elijah nodded. "I remember his name. He was different." Toma looked away. "He was killed before the agreement could be signed. Shot in the back. They blamed it on my people." "Of course they did. I was there," Toma said. His voice was steady now. "I saw who fired. Men dressed like Apaches, painted faces, but they spoke Spanish and English, one of them called Boone by name. Elijah's jaw tightened. Toma reached for the pouch by his side, pulled out a second paper, this one smaller, folded tight. Before the judge died, he handed me this. Elijah took it, unfolded it slowly. It was a list: names, dates, payments, military supply routes. Elijah read in silence, then looked up. This is proof. Toma nodded. They are arming the rogue bands, selling rifles, then using the attacks as reason to seize land. Elijah closed his eyes. The old feeling in his gut came back, the one he knew from war, when truth came too late, or not at all. They want this treaty dead, Toma said, and me with it. Elijah stood, walked in a slow circle around the cellar. The earth around him was packed tight, cool, sheltering. He rubbed a hand over his beard, then stopped. What happens if you reach your people? Toma looked up. Then the truth lives. And if you don't, Toma said nothing, but his silence answered loud enough. Elijah folded the paper again, put it with the letter from the judge, both now in the inside pocket of his coat. He turned back to Toma. You are not dying down here. Toma smiled faintly. I might not get to choose. Elijah stepped closer. You already did. When you kept that letter, when you ran instead of hiding. He paused. So now I choose too. Above them, a noise stirred. Not loud, but real. Elijah blew out the lantern, waited, then climbed the ladder fast but quiet. He opened the shed door slowly, stepped into the early light, and saw what he feared: fresh tracks in the dirt. Not his. Someone had been close, too close. He looked toward the ridge, but saw only the desert stretching wide. Still, but not safe. Back inside the house, Elijah laid the 2 letters on the table. Read them again, every word, every name. The judge had been careful, thorough. A dying man who knew what kind of world he was leaving behind. Elijah looked toward the barn, toward the well, toward the shed, and finally, toward the horizon. He sat down, poured 1 cup of coffee, drank it slow, then lit his pipe. His thoughts drifted back to his wife, to his boy. What would they have done? He did not know, but he knew what he would do now, and that had to be enough. The wind shifted near sundown, not strong, but different, like it carried something with it, something waiting. Elijah McCade sat on the front step. His rifle leaned against the porch rail. The letters from Judge Trent sat folded in his coat pocket. He had read them again that afternoon, twice, each time. The truth burned a little hotter in his chest. Inside the root cellar, Toma had slept, but only in pieces. Elijah could hear him stir sometimes, cough quietly, shift his weight. The wound was healing, slowly, but the fire in his voice had returned, and that worried Elijah more than the fever, because it meant he was planning. When the light grew soft, Elijah walked to the shed, opened the door, stepped down into the earth. Toma sat upright now, wrapped in the same blanket, but alert. His eyes met Elijah's. I need to go soon. You will not make it far, Elijah said. Toma nodded. Not alone. Then he looked toward the corner, where his pouch lay. He reached for it. Tonight, he said, I will call them. Elijah frowned. Call who, my people? Toma said. Elijah folded his arms. We are miles from the nearest village. You can barely stand. I do not need to walk, Toma replied, then added, I only need to sing. Elijah blinked. You are serious? Toma nodded. There is a song. Not many know it anymore. It is old, older than my grandfather. It is not music. It is a message. Elijah rubbed the back of his neck. And you think they will hear it? Toma looked up. They will. Elijah did not argue. He had seen stranger things in this land, and sometimes belief was stronger than logic. He handed Toma the canteen, then climbed out of the cellar, and waited. Night fell slow over the ranch. The stars blinked into place, one by one. The moon rose low and full behind the ridge, and then it began. A sound, low, soft, carried on the air like smoke. At first, Elijah could barely hear it. Just a hum, like wind through stone. Then the tone rose, not louder, but deeper. He could feel it, not in his ears, in his chest, in the ground beneath his boots. A song without words, without rhythm, but with purpose, calling. He stood still by the barn, eyes closed. Let the sound wash over him. It felt like sorrow and strength, like mourning and hope, a voice tied to the desert itself, to every ridge and rock and canyon. Toma was singing, but it was more than that. He was reaching, and somewhere, across miles of silence and sand, someone was listening. The song lasted many minutes. Elijah did not check his watch. He just listened. When it ended, the night went quiet again, so still it made his breath sound too loud. He walked to the shed, opened it. Toma was lying down again, exhausted, his chest rising slow, but there was peace in his face. Not fear, not worry, only peace. Elijah sat beside him. Neither man spoke for a long time. Then Toma said, "They are coming." Elijah nodded. "Let us hope they find us first." Toma closed his eyes, and the desert returned to stillness. But Elijah could not sleep that night, not even in the chair by the front door. He kept the lamp low, kept his rifle near, and listened. For hooves, for voices, for anything. Then sometime before dawn, it came. Not sound, not light, but a feeling, a shift in the air, like the land itself had begun to stir. Something was coming, not just danger, something older, wiser, something wild, and not afraid. The dust rose before the sun. Elijah McCade saw it first from the porch, a line of it, long and low, moving across the plain like a whisper turned wild. Riders, more than before, too many to count. He stood, felt the wood creak under his boots, then stepped down onto the dirt. Toma had said they would come, but even Elijah was not ready for the sight. The riders came fast, not with guns drawn, not shouting, but moving with purpose. And at the head rode a woman, tall, proud. Her gray braids caught the morning light. She wore no badge, no armor, only silence. But that silence carried weight. Naoma, Toma's mother. Elijah stepped forward as the horses slowed. The riders spread out in a wide half circle. They made no sound, just watched, waited. Naoma dismounted, walked toward Elijah, her steps slow, measured. The kind of steps that came from knowing the earth beneath you. She stopped 3 feet away, looked into his eyes, then spoke, her voice low but clear. "My son." Elijah nodded. "He is alive." Naoma exhaled, closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was steel behind them. "I want to see him." Elijah led her to the shed, opened the door, lifted the trap, and stepped back. Naoma descended without help, into the earth, into the dark. Elijah waited above. A few moments passed, then more. The wind picked up, carried dust across his boots. Then the hatch opened. She came up slowly. Behind her, Toma followed, leaning on her arm, but standing, barely. Elijah helped him the rest of the way. carried him to a bench near the barn. The riders watched, still silent, still waiting. Then Naoma turned to them, raised one hand, and they dismounted. Together, like a single breath held too long. Among them was a younger man. He stepped forward, carried a leather pouch, handed it to Naoma. She opened it, pulled out a stack of folded pages. "Elijah," she said, "may I?" He nodded. She spread the papers across a wooden crate, called out names, places, amounts, all tied to the stolen arms trade, all linked to one name at the center, Captain Boone Halley. The circle grew tighter. The riders leaned in, faces hardening. Some whispered, others clenched fists. Elijah stood with arms crossed, watching the truth settle like sand in a storm. Then Toma spoke, voice rough, but strong. He was there, the night the judge died. He gave the order. Naoma nodded, and now he hunts the witness. A rider stepped forward. "You have proof?" Toma lifted a folded paper from his coat. The original letter from Judge Trent. Signed, stamped, unmistakable. He handed it to the rider. The man read, then passed it to the next, and the next, until the whole circle had seen. Elijah watched the change happen, in their eyes, in their posture. They were no longer riding in defense. They were moving toward justice, real justice, the kind that did not need a courtroom, only truth, and the will to act. Then came another sound, a single rider, from the north, alone, moving fast. He pulled up hard, dust flying, a young deputy from town, sweat on his brow, fear in his voice. "They are coming," he said. "Boone, his men. They are riding hard, and they are armed." The circle turned, eyes narrowing. Naoma looked to Elijah. "We do not run." Elijah shook his head. "No, we do not." Toma tried to stand on his own. He wobbled, but stayed upright. Naoma placed a hand on his shoulder. "I will speak when they arrive, but they will not listen to me." Elijah nodded. "They might listen to me." He walked toward the fence, his rifle slung over his back. Dust rising again on the horizon. Another storm, this one with teeth. And it was coming fast. They came fast, 6 riders, dust trailing like smoke behind them, weapons ready, eyes sharp, and Boone Halley at the front. Elijah McCade stood alone by the fence, no rifle in hand, just watching, waiting. Behind him, the Hopi riders formed a silent wall, not threatening, but unmoving. Toma sat beside Naoma, wrapped in a blanket, his face pale but resolute. Boone pulled up his horse hard, looked around, then dismounted. He walked toward Elijah like a man who had already written the ending. "Elijah," he said, voice calm, too calm, "looks like you have company." Elijah said nothing, just looked him in the eye. Boone gestured behind Elijah. "Those are your new friends. Seems like you chose your side." Elijah finally spoke. "I chose the truth." Boone smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. "And what do you think truth will buy you out here?" "Maybe nothing," Elijah said, "but it will buy you something else." Boone tilted his head. "What's that reckoning?" The riders behind Boone shifted, hands on holsters, eyes darting. They could feel it. Something was wrong. Boone walked closer, only feet away now. "I do not care what you think you have," he said. "That Indian boy is a wanted man. He murdered a federal judge." Toma stood, wobbled, but shouted across the yard. Liar Boone looked past Elijah, right at Toma, eyes narrow. "I should have made sure you died that night." Naoma stepped forward. "You failed, and the world will know it." Boone pulled out a paper from his coat. "This is a warrant, signed in Santa Fe. Says I can take him dead or alive." Elijah stepped between them. "You are not taking him." Boone's smile vanished, and for the first time, he drew his gun. "Move, Elijah." "No, I said move. I heard you." Boone's voice turned sharp. "You think anyone will care if you die here?" Elijah's voice was quiet. "Maybe not, but I will die standing for something." Boone's hand trembled. Not much, but enough. His men looked unsure. One of them even stepped back. Then Toma raised his voice and sang. Not the full song, just a line. Soft, clear. And suddenly, all the Hopi warriors moved, not to draw weapons, but to stand, shoulder to shoulder, like a wall of stone. Boone looked around and realized the numbers were against him. Worse. So was the truth. He saw it in their faces, in his own men's eyes. This was no longer about authority. It was about justice. And he had none left. Then he turned to Elijah, voice low, almost begging. "I still have friends in Santa Fe. This can go away. Just hand him over." Elijah shook his head. "No. Boone, this ends here." Boone raised his pistol again, but he never got to fire. A shot rang out, loud, clear, from behind. Boone jerked, dropped to his knees. His gun fell to the dirt. He gasped, turned slowly, and saw his own deputy, rifle still smoking. Eyes full of sorrow. "I cannot let you do this," the deputy said. Boone fell forward, face down. The dust swallowed him whole. No one moved for a moment. Then Naoma stepped forward, knelt beside the body, said a quiet prayer, for him, for the dead judge, for the land. Elijah picked up Boone's fallen pistol, held it for a moment, then handed it to the deputy. "It is done," he said, but his voice was heavy. Toma looked to the sky. The sun had risen fully now, golden light washing over the ranch, and for the first time, in days, he smiled. The sun dipped low again that evening. Long shadows stretched across the dirt yard of Elijah McCade's ranch, but the air felt lighter now, still, peaceful. Boone Halley's body had been wrapped in canvas, loaded quietly onto a wagon. His men said nothing as they rode off. No words of anger, no argument, only silence, and maybe, somewhere in that silence, shame. Inside the house, Elijah poured hot water into a basin. Toma sat at the table, his wound cleaned, bandaged, color returning to his cheeks. He looked around the small kitchen, at the shelves, the handmade chairs, the rifle above the door, and he smiled. "This place is not what I expected," he said. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect, Walls?" Toma said. "Guns, fear." Elijah chuckled softly. "I used to carry all of those." Naoma stood near the window, looking out toward the fading light. She had not spoken much since Boone fell, but her presence filled the room, like an old oak tree, strong, rooted, unshakable. "I think it is time," she said. Toma nodded. Elijah helped him up, walked him to the door. Outside, the Hopi riders waited, still and quiet, but this time, their faces showed something different. Pride, relief, respect, one by one. They approached Elijah, not with weapons, not with suspicion, but with open palms. Each man touched his shoulder, a simple gesture, a quiet thank you. And then, the chief stepped forward, an elder with silver in his hair. He carried something wrapped in leather. He unwrapped it carefully and handed it to Elijah. It was a spear, short and curved, decorated with beads and hawk feathers, its shaft worn smooth by time. "This belonged to my brother," the elder said, "given to him when he chose peace instead of war. Now, it belongs to you." Elijah stared at the weapon, humbled. He took it slowly and bowed his head. Toma placed a hand on Elijah's arm. "You saved more than me, old man," he said. "You saved a future." Elijah gave a quiet laugh. "Not sure I meant to." "Does not matter," Naoma said. "What matters is that you did." As the riders prepared to leave, Elijah walked with Toma to the edge of the yard. The two men stood there a long time, watching the others mount up, listening to the wind in the sagebrush. Then Toma turned, held out his hand. "Elijah," he said, "you are always welcome among us, not as a guest, as kin." Elijah shook his hand firmly, then pulled him in for an embrace, rough, silent, real. And then they rode, 50 horses, moving as one, into the open land. Elijah stood watching until the dust settled. Then he turned back to the porch, sat on the top step, the spear across his knees. A warm breeze touched his face. He looked out over the land, same as it had always been, same as it would always be. But something inside him had changed. He thought of his wife, his son, what they might have said, and maybe, somewhere out there, they were proud. The day ended without fanfare, just the quiet settling of evening, the sound of crickets, the creak of the house, and the soft glow of a lantern in the window. Elijah McCade, rancher of dry earth and quiet days, had lived another story, one he would never forget, and one he would never stop believing in. Because sometimes, a single act of kindness can change the course of nations, and sometimes, the greatest battles are won by simply choosing to care. Sometimes, the smallest choices carry the greatest weight. Elijah McCade did not set out to change the world. He only offered water to a stranger in pain, but that single act of kindness unraveled lies, saved lives, and bridged a divide between peoples long at odds. This story reminds us that courage is not always loud. It often looks like quiet mercy. A hand extended, a moment of compassion when fear says turn away. In a world that moves fast and forgets easily, we need these reminders that truth still matters, that character is built when no one is watching, and that healing begins when we see each other not as enemies, but as human beings. You may never find yourself in the desert, holding a life or death decision, but each day you have chances to choose compassion, to stand for what is right. And sometimes that is how peace begins, one cup of water at a time. Thank you for spending time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who believes in kindness and quiet courage, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps Wild West Echoes grow and reach 1,000 subscribers. Every click brings these forgotten stories back to life. We will see you in the next one. Until then, stay kind, stay strong.